The bloodied bullet wound in Naomi Devereaux's shoulder hadn't stopped her from clutching her infant daughter protectively against her chest as she stood on the auction block in the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory. 1876, a spectacle that made Zachariah Jameson's blood boil as he pushed through the crowd of jeering men with determination in his eyes and $600 in his pocket. Chapter 1. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the makeshift auction platform erected in Redemption Creek's town square. Zachariah Jameson adjusted his worn Stetson, shielding his eyes from the harsh glare as he surveyed the growing crowd. At 32, he'd seen his fair share of injustices in the West, but nothing quite like this. "Next up," bellowed August Wilkins, the town's self-appointed auctioneer and owner of the saloon. "A woman and her bastard child. Woman's got some fight in her, but nothing a firm hand can't fix. Starting bid is $50. Zach's jaw tightened as he caught sight of the woman standing on the platform. Her chestnut hair hung in tangled waves around a face that, despite its dirt and bruises, possessed a quiet dignity that struck him immediately. The crude bandage wrapped around her left shoulder was stained with blood, and her threadbare dress hung loosely on her thin frame. But it was the fierce, protective way she held the small bundle against her chest that truly caught his attention. $50, called a voice from the crowd. Zach recognized Bart Hollister, the owner of the local brothel. 75, countered another man. The bidding continued, and Zach watched as the woman's eyes darted around the crowd, not with fear, but with calculation. She was looking for an opportunity, he realized. Even wounded and exhausted, she was planning an escape. 150, Zach called out clearly, his voice cutting through the chatter. A hush fell over the crowd as heads turned to look at him. Zachariah Jameson was known throughout the territory as a fair but private man. His ranch, the Double J, was one of the most successful in the region, but he rarely came to town except for supplies and certainly never participated in the seedier aspects of frontier life. Well, Wilkins grinned, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "Looks like Jameson's finally in need of a woman. Got 150 from the gentleman rancher. Do I hear 175? 175, Hollister called, eyeing Zach with suspicion. Zach met the woman's gaze. Her eyes were a striking amber color, filled with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. The baby in her arms whimpered softly, and she instinctively shifted to comfort the child. 300, Zach countered. Whispers rippled through the crowd. 325, Hollister said, his voice strained. 400, Zach responded without hesitation. Hollister scowled. 450. 600, Zach stated firmly, staring directly at Wilkins. The auctioneer's eyebrows shot up. Even he seemed surprised by the amount. $600 was enough to buy a good horse and tack with money left over. 600 going once, Wilkins called, looking around the crowd. Hollister shook his head and stepped back. Going twice. Sold to Zachariah Jameson for $600. The crowd parted as Zach approached the platform, counting out the bills and handing them to Wilkins. Up close, he could see that the woman was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 23 or 24. Despite her condition, she stood tall, her chin lifted slightly. "What's your name?" Zach asked quietly as he helped her down from the platform. Her voice was hoarse but clear. Naomi Devereaux. And the child? A flicker of protective fire lit her eyes. My daughter, Eliza. She's 4 months old. Zach nodded, then surprised everyone, including Naomi, by removing his coat and draping it gently over her shoulders, careful to avoid her wound. My wagon's this way, he said, guiding her through the now dispersing crowd. Naomi followed, her legs unsteady but her grip on her daughter firm. Why? She asked simply when they reached his wagon. Zach helped her onto the seat before responding. No person should be sold like cattle, he said, his voice low and controlled. Especially not a mother and child. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, but before he flicked them to set the horses in motion, he turned to her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Miss Devereux, I know this is forward, and you have no reason to trust me, but I have a proposition for you." Naomi tensed visibly, clutching Eliza closer. "I've been alone too long," Zach continued, his voice growing softer. "My ranch needs a woman's touch, and that child needs a safe place to grow. I'm asking if you'd consider marrying me. Today." Naomi's amber eyes widened in shock. "You want to marry me? A woman you just bought at auction? A stranger?" Zach nodded, his expression serious. "I do. Not because I bought you in my mind. That money was to free you, not to own you. I'm asking because I see something in you, something worth building a life with." "You know nothing about me," Naomi whispered. "I know you die protecting your daughter," Zach replied. "That tells me enough about your character for now. The rest we can learn together." He paused, then added, "And if you say no, I'll still take you to my ranch to recover. When you're healed, I'll give you money to start fresh wherever you choose." Eliza stirred in her mother's arms, letting out a tiny cry. As Naomi soothed her, she studied Zachariah Jameson's face, the clear blue eyes, the strong jawline softened somewhat by a neatly trimmed beard, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy that her instincts responded to despite everything she'd been through. "Why today?" she finally asked. "Why not wait?" Zach's expression grew solemn. "Because without the protection of my name, you're still vulnerable. Marriage would give you and Eliza legal protection that I can't otherwise provide." Naomi looked down at her daughter's face, then back at the town behind them. Her shoulder throbbed with pain, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. But in this man's unexpected offer, she sensed not just safety, but possibility. "Yes," she said at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will marry you today, Mr. Jameson." Zach's face broke into a smile that transformed his features, revealing a warmth that caught Naomi by surprise. "Zach," he corrected gently. "If we're to be married, you should call me Zach." He flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, carrying them away from Redemption Creek and toward an uncertain future that, for the first time in months, held a glimmer of hope. Chapter 2. The wagon rattled along the dusty trail that led out of town, each jolt sending waves of pain through Naomi's wounded shoulder. She did her best to keep her face composed, but Zach noticed her wincing. "There's a doctor who lives about 2 miles from here," he said, slowing the horses slightly to make the ride smoother. "We'll stop there before heading to the ranch. That wound needs proper tending." Naomi nodded gratefully. "Thank you. How did it happen?" Zach asked, his eyes on the road ahead. Naomi was silent for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she spoke, her voice distant as if recalling a nightmare. 3 men attacked our wagon 5 days ago, just north of here. My husband, Daniel." Her voice faltered. "They shot him when he tried to protect us. The bullet that hit me was meant for Eliza." Zach's hands tightened on the reins. "I'm sorry." "They took everything we had," Naomi continued. "Our wagon, our supplies, even Daniel's wedding ring. I managed to run with Eliza into the woods, but the wound slowed me down. A day later, some men from town found me collapsed on the trail. I thought they were helping us, but they brought me to that auction instead." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Apparently, a woman without a man or money is just another piece of property in these parts." "Not to everyone," Zach said quietly. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the occasional soft noises from Eliza. The baby seemed surprisingly calm despite everything, her wide eyes taking in the passing landscape. She looks like you, Zach observed, glancing at the child's delicate features. A small, genuine smile touched Naomi's lips. Everyone says that, but she has her father's eyes. As they approached a modest cabin set back from the road, smoke curling from its chimney, Zach explained. Dr. Morgan retired from practice in Philadelphia to follow his daughter out west. He only takes cases that interest him now, but he's the best doctor in 3 counties. He helped Naomi down from the wagon, again noting how she swayed slightly with weakness but refused to show it. With one hand supporting her elbow and the other carrying their small bag of belongings, he guided her to the cabin door. The doctor, a white-haired man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, took one look at Naomi and ushered them inside without preamble. "Bullet wound?" he asked, already gathering supplies. "Yes," Zach confirmed. 5 days old, minimally treated. Dr. Morgan nodded briskly. "Young woman, you'll need to sit here and let me examine that shoulder. Mr. Jameson, perhaps you could hold the baby." Naomi hesitated, instinctively clutching Eliza tighter. "It's all right," Zach said gently. "I've held babies before. My sister has 3 little ones." After a moment's consideration, Naomi carefully transferred Eliza into Zach's arms. The transition awakened the infant, who blinked up at Zach's bearded face with curiosity rather than fear. He cradled her with surprising tenderness for such large hands, murmuring softly to her as Dr. Morgan helped Naomi remove the coat and gently cut away the bloodied bandage. The doctor muttered as he examined the wound. "The bullet passed clean through, which is fortunate. But there's infection starting. You're lucky you got here when you did, young lady." As the doctor worked to clean and properly dress the wound, Zach paced slowly around the room with Eliza, who seemed content in his arms. Naomi watched them through eyes hazy with pain as the doctor applied a stinging antiseptic to her shoulder. "She likes you," Naomi observed, her voice tight. Zach smiled down at the baby. "She's easy to like back, Dr. Morgan raised an eyebrow as he wrapped fresh bandages around Naomi's shoulder. "Might I inquire as to your relationship with this young woman, Jameson? I wasn't aware you had taken a wife." "I haven't yet," Zach replied honestly. "But I intend to this afternoon if possible. That's actually the second reason we stopped here, Doctor. I was hoping you might serve as a witness." The doctor's hands paused in their work. "A hasty marriage, then?" "Necessary," Zach corrected. Dr. Morgan looked between them, his shrewd eyes taking in Naomi's condition, the baby, and the protective stance Zach had unconsciously adopted. "I see. Well, the Reverend lives just up the road. He could perform the ceremony, and my wife and I could witness it." He turned to Naomi. "Assuming that's what you want, my dear?" Naomi met his gaze steadily. "It is." The doctor nodded, completing his work on her shoulder. "Then let me give you something for the pain, and I'll send my boy to fetch Reverend Hayes." An hour later, Naomi found herself standing in the doctor's small parlor, wearing a clean dress borrowed from Mrs. Morgan. It was a simple blue cotton garment, a bit loose on her frame but infinitely better than her tattered clothes. Eliza, freshly changed and fed, slept peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer. Reverend Hayes, a tall man with kind eyes, spoke the traditional wedding service with sincerity, as if this were a long-planned ceremony instead of a hastily arranged union between virtual strangers. Dr. and Mrs. Morgan stood as witnesses, their expressions a mixture of concern and cautious approval. When it came time for the vows, Zach took both of Naomi's hands in his, careful of her injured shoulder. Looking into her eyes, he spoke with quiet conviction. "I, Zachariah James Jameson, take you, Naomi Devereux, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to protect you and Eliza, to provide for you both, and to be patient as we build a life together." I will honor and respect you, and never make you regret the trust you've placed in me today. Naomi felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. When her turn came, she had to clear her throat before speaking. I, Naomi Elizabeth Devereux, take you, Zachariah Jameson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to bring care and consideration to your home, to be honest in all our dealings, and to work alongside you in building our future. I will honor the protection you've offered us and strive to be a wife you can be proud of. The ring? Prompted Reverend Hayes. Zach reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. Naomi's eyes widened in surprise. It was my mother's, he explained softly. I've carried it with me since she passed. As he slipped it onto her finger, the metal warm from being in his pocket, Naomi felt the weight of what they were doing settle fully upon her. This was real. She was marrying a man she had known for less than a day, binding her future and her daughters to his. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Hayes declared. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Jameson. Zach hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a gentle, chaste kiss on Naomi's lips. It lasted only a moment, but in that brief contact, Naomi felt a spark of something unexpected, a warmth that traveled from her lips to somewhere deep inside her chest. When they parted, Zach's eyes held a question that Naomi couldn't quite answer, but she offered him a small, genuine smile, and was rewarded with one in return that transformed his entire face. Congratulations, Mrs. Morgan said, stepping forward to embrace Naomi carefully. May God bless your union. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Morgan handed Zach a small packet of powders. For the pain, he explained. And bring her back in a week so I can check that wound. She'll need rest and good food to recover her strength. Zach nodded, slipping the medicine into his pocket. Thank you, doctor, for everything. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon as they loaded back into the wagon, Eliza once again secure in Naomi's arms. As they pulled away from the doctor's cabin, Naomi glanced down at the gold band on her finger, then at the man beside her, her husband. How far is your ranch? She asked. About 2 hours' ride, Zach replied. We should get there just before dark. He glanced at her. Are you comfortable enough to travel? We could stay in town if you need more rest. No, Naomi said quickly, the thought of returning to Redemption Creek filling her with dread. I'd rather go home. The word felt strange on her tongue. Home, a concept that had become foreign to her in recent weeks. Zach nodded, understanding in his eyes. Home it is, then, Mrs. Jameson. The new name startled her, but not unpleasantly. As the wagon rolled forward into the gathering dusk, Naomi Jameson held her daughter close and wondered what kind of life awaited them at the end of this journey. Chapter 3. The Double J Ranch came into view just as the last rays of sunlight painted the western sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Nestled in a verdant valley with mountains rising in the distance, the ranch was larger and more established than Naomi had expected. A substantial 2-story house stood as the centerpiece, with a barn, corral, and several outbuildings arranged around it. A creek wound its way through the property, its waters glinting in the fading light. It's beautiful, Naomi murmured, taking in the peaceful scene. Zach nodded, a hint of pride in his voice. My father started with nothing but 100 acres and a dream. We've expanded to over 2,000 acres now. Good grazing land for the cattle, and the mountains protect us from the worst of the winter storms. As they approached the house, a tall, lanky young man emerged from the barn, waving in greeting. That's Noah, Zach explained. My foreman's son. He helps out around the place. Noah jogged over as Zach brought the wagon to a halt in front of the house. Evening, Mr. Jameson. Didn't expect you back so soon. He stopped short when he noticed Naomi and the baby, his young face registering surprise. "Noah, I'd like you to meet my wife, Naomi, and her daughter, Eliza," Zach said, his tone matter-of-fact despite the momentous announcement. Noah's mouth fell open briefly before he recovered his composure. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and nodding respectfully. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "Thank you, Noah," Naomi replied, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. "Would you mind taking care of the horses?" Zach asked as he helped Naomi down from the wagon. "And let your father know we'll need to speak with him in the morning." "Yes, sir," Noah replied, still looking bewildered as he took the reins. Zach guided Naomi toward the house, supporting her with a gentle hand at her waist. The medication Dr. Morgan had given her was wearing off, and exhaustion was setting in, making her steps unsteady. "Just a little further," Zach encouraged as they reached the porch. He opened the door and helped her inside. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, if somewhat sparse in its furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a worn but clean sofa and 2 armchairs arranged before it. A dining table stood near the back of the room, and an open doorway revealed a kitchen beyond. Stairs led to a second floor, and several doors indicated additional rooms on the ground level. "It's not fancy," Zach said, watching her take in their surroundings, "but it's solid. My mother made it home, and after she passed, I've done my best to keep it up." "It's lovely," Naomi said sincerely. The house had a lived-in warmth that was instantly welcoming despite its bachelor simplicity. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked dark hair emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Mr. Jameson, you're back early like Noah." She stopped in surprise at the sight of Naomi and Eliza. "Mrs. Cooper, this is my wife, Naomi, and her daughter, Eliza," Zach said. "Naomi, this is Mrs. Cooper. She comes in 3 days a week to cook and help with the housekeeping." Mrs. Cooper recovered more quickly than Noah had. "Well now, this is a surprise. Welcome to the Double J, Mrs. Jameson." Her keen eyes took in Naomi's pale face and the way she was leaning against Zach for support. "You look done in, my dear. Let's get you sitting down." With efficient kindness, Mrs. Cooper bustled them into the kitchen, where a pot of stew was simmering on the stove. She quickly arranged a comfortable chair for Naomi, prepared a plate of food, and even fashioned a little nest of blankets where Eliza could rest safely. As Naomi ate the first proper meal she'd had in days, Zach quietly explained the situation to Mrs. Cooper, or at least a version of it that preserved Naomi's dignity while conveying the urgency of their marriage and her need for care. "She's been wounded," he concluded. "Dr. Morgan treated her, but she needs rest and time to heal." Mrs. Cooper's expression was a mixture of sympathy and determination. "Don't you worry, Mr. Jameson. I'll come in every day until she's back on her feet. The poor lamb looks like she hasn't had a proper meal or night's sleep in weeks." After Naomi had eaten and Mrs. Cooper had helped her wash up as best she could with her injured shoulder, Zach showed her upstairs to the bedroom. "This was my parents' room," he said, opening the door to a spacious chamber dominated by a large 4-poster bed. "I've been using the smaller room down the hall, but this should be more comfortable for you and Eliza." Naomi turned to him, confusion evident in her tired eyes. "But where will you sleep?" Zach's expression softened. "I'll stay in my room for now. You need time to heal, Naomi, and to get to know me better. This marriage may be legal, but I understand it will take time for it to be real in other ways." Relief and gratitude washed over her. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, then gestured to a trunk at the foot of the bed. "There are some of my mother's things in their nightclothes and such. They might be a bit large, but they're clean. Mrs. Cooper can help you find what you need." As he turned to leave, Naomi caught his hand. "Zach," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. I don't know how to thank you for what you've done today." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "You don't need to thank me, Naomi. Just get well and give this a chance to work. That's all I ask." After he left, Mrs. Cooper helped Naomi change into a soft cotton nightgown that had belonged to Zach's mother, carefully navigating around her bandaged shoulder. She also helped arrange a makeshift cradle for Eliza using a drawer from the dresser, lined with soft blankets. "Mr. Jameson is a good man," Mrs. Cooper said as she tucked the blankets around Naomi. "I've worked for him for 5 years, since his father passed, and I've never known him to be anything but fair and decent." "How old is he?" Naomi asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about her new husband. 32 come November, Mrs. Cooper replied. "Born and raised right here on this ranch. Lost his mother to fever when he was 16, and his father to a fall from a horse 5 years back. He's been running things on his own since then, and doing a fine job of it too." "Has he ever been married before?" Mrs. Cooper shook her head. "There was talk of him courting the schoolteacher in town a couple years back, but nothing came of it. He's always been focused on the ranch." She patted Naomi's hand. "Which is why the whole town will be shocked to hear he's brought home a wife. But it'll be good for him having a family. This house has been too quiet for too long." After Mrs. Cooper left for her own home, promising to return early the next morning, Naomi lay in the large bed listening to Eliza's soft breathing. The events of the day seemed almost dreamlike in their improbability. This morning, she had been a prisoner awaiting auction, certain that she and Eliza faced a grim future. Tonight, she was the wife of a respected rancher, lying in a comfortable bed in a solid home. She thought of Zachariah Jameson, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the gentle way he had held Eliza. He was a stranger still, and yet she had entrusted her life and her daughter's future to him. Had she been reckless, driven by desperation, or had her instincts guided her true? As sleep began to claim her, Naomi's hand drifted to the gold band on her finger. Whatever the future held, she was now Naomi Jameson, and for tonight at least, she and Eliza were safe. Chapter 4. Naomi awoke to sunlight streaming through curtained windows and the unfamiliar sensation of comfort. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Where was she? Then the events of the previous day rushed back. The auction, Zach's intervention, their hasty marriage, the journey to the ranch. Eliza's soft cooing drew her attention to the makeshift cradle. The baby was awake, contentedly batting at the air with tiny fists. Despite everything, Eliza seemed to be thriving, her round cheeks and bright eyes a testament to her resilience. "Good morning, little one," Naomi murmured, carefully sitting up. Her shoulder throbbed dully, but the sharp, fiery pain of yesterday had subsided to a more manageable ache. She managed to lift Eliza with her good arm and settled back against the pillows to nurse her. A gentle knock at the door interrupted the peaceful moment. "Mrs. Jameson? It's Florence Cooper. May I come in?" "Yes, please," Naomi called. Mrs. Cooper entered carrying a tray with a steaming cup of coffee, a plate of biscuits, and a small bowl of preserves. "Good morning, dear. I thought you might like some breakfast before getting up." "That's very kind, thank you," Naomi said gratefully. Mrs. Cooper set the tray on the bedside table, then cooed at Eliza. "And good morning to you too, little miss. Aren't you the prettiest thing?" She turned back to Naomi. "Mr. Jameson asked me to tell you that he'll be working with the cattle this morning but should be back for the noon meal. He also said you're to rest as much as you need and not worry about anything today." After Naomi finished nursing Eliza, Mrs. Cooper helped her dress in one of the simpler dresses from the trunk. It belonged to Zach's mother, a woman who had apparently been taller and somewhat fuller figured than Naomi, but with a few strategic pins, they made it presentable. "I'll take your measurements later," Mrs. Cooper promised. "And we can alter these properly or make you some new things. I'm handy with a needle, and there's plenty of good fabric in town." With Eliza settled in her arms, Naomi made her way downstairs, moving slowly to accommodate her injury. The house looked even more welcoming in the morning light. The main room was spacious and well-proportioned, with large windows offering views of the ranch and mountains beyond. Despite the masculine simplicity of the furnishings, it was clean and orderly. "Would you like a tour?" Mrs. Cooper offered. "Though perhaps we should wait until you're stronger for the outdoors." "I'd like to see the house at least," Naomi replied. She was eager to understand the place that was now her home. The tour revealed a well-built, practical home. Besides the main room with its dining area and sitting space, there was a study lined with bookshelves, a kitchen with a large cast iron stove and ample workspace, and a small sewing room that Mrs. Cooper used. Upstairs, in addition to the master bedroom where Naomi had slept, there were 3 other bedrooms, one currently used by Zach, one set up as a guest room, and one used for storage. "Mr. Jameson's sister and her family visit from Denver a couple times a year," Mrs. Cooper explained. "They stay in the guest room, though it's a tight fit with the 3 children." Throughout the tour, Naomi noticed touches that spoke of a home rather than just a house: handmade quilts draped over chairs, a collection of carved wooden animals on a shelf in the study, pressed wildflowers framed on the walls. "Mrs. Jameson, the first Mrs. Jameson, that has had an eye for making things homey," Mrs. Cooper said, following Naomi's gaze to a particularly fine quilt. "And she taught both her children to appreciate beauty alongside practicality." By the time they returned to the main room, Naomi was tired but felt more oriented in her new surroundings. She settled into a comfortable chair near the window, where she could look out at the ranch while holding Eliza. "I'll bring you some tea," Mrs. Cooper said, "and then I need to start on the noon meal. Mr. Jameson is particularly fond of apple pie, and I thought we might make it a bit special today." Left alone with her thoughts, Naomi watched the activity of the ranch. In the distance, she could see men on horseback moving among the cattle. Closer to the house, a young boy, possibly Noah, was carrying buckets to and from the barn. The scene was one of organized industry, everyone seeming to know their role in the larger operation. Her contemplation was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching. Through the window, she saw Zach dismounting from a handsome chestnut gelding, speaking briefly to another rider before heading toward the house. He paused on the porch to remove his hat and dust off his clothes before entering. When he stepped inside, his eyes immediately sought her out, and a smile warmed his features when he saw her seated by the window. "Good morning," he said, crossing to her side. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Naomi replied honestly. "The rest has helped." Zach nodded, his gaze dropping to Eliza, who was awake and alert in her mother's arms. "And how's the little one?" "Surprisingly content, considering everything she's been through." "Children are resilient," Zach observed. He hesitated, then asked, "May I hold her? My hands are clean, I washed up outside." Naomi carefully transferred Eliza to his arms. The contrast between his large, work-roughened hands and the tiny infant was striking. Yet he held her with natural ease, cradling her head securely. "She's a beauty," he said softly, smiling as Eliza grabbed at his finger. "Just like her mother." The compliment brought unexpected warmth to Naomi's cheeks. Before she could respond, Mrs. Cooper appeared from the kitchen. "Lunch will be ready in about 20 minutes, Mr. Jameson. I've set an extra place for Mr. Garrett, as you requested." "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper," Zach replied. "I thought it was time for Naomi to meet my foreman." As Mrs. Cooper returned to the kitchen, Zach carefully sat in the chair opposite Naomi, still holding Eliza. "John Garrett has been with the ranch since my father's time," he explained. "He runs the day-to-day operations with the hands, and I trust him completely. He should know about our situation. Naomi tensed slightly. What will you tell him? Zach considered the question. The truth, or most of it. That I found you in trouble in town, that you needed help, and that I offered marriage as protection for you and Eliza. He met her eyes directly. I won't share the details of the auction or your wound unless you want me to. Thank you, Naomi said softly, grateful for his discretion. They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, Zach seemingly content to hold Eliza while Naomi rested. The domesticity of the scene felt strange yet comforting, a glimpse of what their life together might become. A knock at the door announced John Garrett's arrival. He was a weathered man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the bow-legged stance of someone who had spent most of his life on horseback. His expression registered surprise when Zach introduced Naomi as his wife, but he recovered quickly, offering his congratulations with genuine warmth. Over Mrs. Cooper's excellent meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, Zach explained the situation to his foreman in simple terms: that he had met Naomi in town, learned of her difficult circumstances, and offered marriage as a solution. The ranch could use a woman's touch, Zach concluded. And I'm not getting any younger. Sometimes the right decision doesn't need months of deliberation. Garrett nodded thoughtfully. Well, Mrs. Jameson, you're certainly welcome here. The boys will be surprised. They've been betting for years on when the boss might finally settle down, but they'll be respectful or answer to me. Thank you, Mr. Garrett, Naomi replied. I appreciate your understanding. John, please, the foreman corrected with a smile. We're not much for formality out here. After lunch, while Zach and John discussed ranch business in the study, Mrs. Cooper helped Naomi settle on the sofa with some mending. Though her injured shoulder limited what she could do, Naomi was determined to be useful. You don't need to prove anything, Mrs. Cooper told her gently. Mr. Jameson understands you need time to heal. I know, Naomi replied, carefully threading a needle. But I want to contribute something. I've never been one to sit idle. As she worked, Naomi found herself thinking about her new husband. Zachariah Jameson was not what she had expected when he first bid on her at the auction. He was quiet but not cold, confident but not arrogant. There was a steadiness to him that she found reassuring after months of uncertainty and fear. And yet, he remained largely a mystery. What kind of man marries a stranger, offering protection and a home without demanding anything in return? Was it loneliness, as he had suggested, or something else that had prompted his unusual proposal? The afternoon passed peacefully, with Eliza napping in her makeshift cradle and Mrs. Cooper bustling about the house. When Zach and John emerged from the study, they found Naomi dozing on the sofa, her mending fallen to her lap. She's exhausted herself, Mrs. Cooper whispered, gathering the sewing. I tried to tell her to rest, but she's determined to be useful. Zach nodded, his expression softening as he looked at his sleeping wife. Let her rest. I'll check on the apple pie you mentioned was baking. By the time Naomi awoke, the house was filled with the delicious aroma of baked apples and cinnamon. She found Zach seated at the dining table, papers spread before him, while Mrs. Cooper prepared to serve the evening meal. I'm sorry, Naomi said, embarrassed to have slept so long. I didn't mean to be lazy. You're healing, Zach corrected, rising to help her to the table. That's not laziness, it's necessity. As they shared the evening meal, a simple but satisfying beef stew with Mrs. Cooper's apple pie for dessert, Naomi found herself watching Zach. He ate with the hearty appetite of a man who had worked physically all day, but his manners were unexpectedly refined. This was my mother's recipe, he said, taking a second slice of pie. She was from Boston, originally came west as a bride. She brought her cookbook and her piano, much to my father's amusement. You have a piano? Naomi asked, surprised. Zach nodded toward a door off the main room that had remained closed during the tour. In there. It's been mostly silent since she passed, though my sister plays when she visits. After dinner, Mrs. Cooper prepared to leave for her own home in town. I'll be back early tomorrow, she promised, and I've left a cold supper for you in the kitchen, Mr. Jameson, in case Mrs. Jameson retires early. Once they were alone, a new awkwardness descended. Despite being legally married, they were still virtual strangers, and the intimacy of being alone together in the house was unfamiliar territory. Would you like to see the piano room? Zach offered, breaking the silence. Naomi nodded, and he led her to the closed door, opening it to reveal a small but charming music room. An upright piano stood against one wall, its wood gleaming in the evening light. Beside it was a comfortable chair and a small bookcase filled with sheet music. My mother insisted that music was essential, even in the wilderness, Zach explained, running his hand lightly over the piano's polished surface. She taught both my sister and me to play. I'm afraid I haven't kept up the practice much since she passed. It's beautiful, Naomi said, touched by this glimpse into his past. Do you mind if I try it sometime? When my shoulder is better, I used to play a little. I'd like that, Zach replied, his smile genuine. This room has been too quiet for too long. As evening deepened into night, Zach helped Naomi up the stairs to her bedroom, carrying Eliza while Naomi navigated the steps carefully. At the door to the master bedroom, he handed the sleeping baby back to her mother. Sleep well, he said softly. If you need anything during the night, I'm just down the hall. Naomi nodded, suddenly acutely aware of the unusual nature of their situation. They were husband and wife, yet he was treating her with the courteous distance one might show a guest. Zach, she said impulsively as he turned to go. Thank you for everything. He paused, his eyes meeting hers in the dim hallway. You're welcome, Naomi. Good night. As she settled into bed with Eliza sleeping peacefully beside her, Naomi thought about the strange path that had led her here. Just 2 days ago, she had been at the lowest point of her life, wounded and facing a future of servitude or worse. Now she was the wife of a respected rancher, sleeping in a comfortable bed in a solid home. The gold band on her finger caught the moonlight streaming through the window. It was a symbol of protection rather than love, of pragmatism rather than passion. And yet, as she drifted towards sleep, Naomi found herself wondering if, in time, it might come to mean something more. Chapter 5 The days that followed established a gentle rhythm to life at the Double J Ranch. Each morning, Naomi would wake to find that Zach had already risen and left the house to begin his day's work. Mrs. Cooper would arrive shortly after, bringing fresh bread or pastries from town along with the latest news and gossip. As Naomi's strength gradually returned, she began to take a more active role in the household. Though her injured shoulder still limited her movements, she insisted on helping with simple tasks, folding laundry, shelling peas, or rocking Eliza while Mrs. Cooper prepared meals. You're recovering faster than I expected, Mrs. Cooper remarked on the 5th day, watching as Naomi competently managed to change Eliza's diaper despite her bandaged shoulder. I've always healed quickly, Naomi replied, and I'm eager to be useful. Mrs. Cooper smiled knowingly. Mr. Jameson hasn't said a word about you being useful. He's just glad you're getting better. That was true, Naomi had to admit. Each evening when Zach returned to the house, his first question was always about her comfort and health, never about what she had accomplished during the day. He seemed genuinely pleased by any small progress in her recovery, celebrating when she managed to walk all the way to the garden behind the house or when she could lift Eliza without wincing. On the 6th day after their marriage, Dr. Morgan came to check on Naomi's wound. Zach had ridden into town to fetch him, insisting that Naomi shouldn't make the journey to his office yet. Healing nicely, the doctor pronounced after examining her shoulder. You've been following my instructions well. Another week or so and you can start using that arm more freely, though I'd avoid heavy lifting for at least a month. After the examination, Dr. Morgan joined them for lunch, observing the interactions between the hastily married couple with clinical interest. Though there was no overt affection between them, there was a growing ease in their conversations, a comfortable familiarity beginning to emerge. You seem to be settling in well, the doctor commented to Naomi as Zach walked him to his horse after the meal. Yes, Naomi agreed, somewhat surprised by the truth of it. Everyone has been very kind. Especially your husband, Dr. Morgan noted shrewdly. Jameson has always been well respected in these parts, but I've never seen him quite so attentive before. Naomi felt a flush rise to her cheeks. He's been a perfect gentleman. The doctor murmured non-committally. Well, my dear, sometimes the best marriages are the ones that start with respect and grow into something more. Give it time. That evening after dinner, as had become their custom, Zach and Naomi sat together in the main room. He usually worked on ranch accounts or read the newspaper while she occupied herself with mending or one of the books from his surprisingly extensive library. Eliza would be settled in her cradle nearby, often watched over by both of them with a mixture of tenderness and pride that sometimes made Naomi's heart ache with bittersweet emotion. Tonight, however, Zach seemed preoccupied, glancing at Naomi several times as if about to speak, then returning to his ledger. Is something wrong? She finally asked, setting aside her sewing. Zach closed his book and met her gaze directly. Not wrong exactly, but there's something we need to discuss. He hesitated, then continued. The monthly supply wagon from Cheyenne arrives tomorrow. It brings mail and news from the larger settlements, and most of the ranch hands come up to the house for their letters and to hear any news from back east. I see, Naomi said, uncertain why this routine event required discussion. It will be the first time most of them meet you, Zach explained. They know I've married, but they haven't been up to the house since you arrived. I wanted to prepare you, and also to ask how much you want me to explain about our situation. Naomi considered the question carefully. What have you told them so far? Just that I met you in Redemption Creek and married you the same day. They're curious, of course, but they're not the type to pry directly. Their wives might be a different matter, Naomi observed with a small smile. Mrs. Cooper has hinted that several of them are eager to meet me. Zach nodded, a rueful expression crossing his face. Sunday services at the little church down the valley will probably be quite well attended this week. Nothing draws a crowd like curiosity. Naomi's smile faded. Will it cause problems for you? This sudden marriage to a stranger, with no courtship or announcement? No, Zach said firmly. This is my ranch and my life, but I want to protect your reputation as much as possible. I thought perhaps we could say we had been corresponding for some time before meeting in person. It's not uncommon out here. A mail-order bride? Naomi clarified. Something like that, though without the formal arrangement through an agency. Just two lonely people writing letters, getting to know each other, and deciding to meet. The fiction was gentler than the truth, Naomi had to admit. It explained their hasty marriage without raising questions about her circumstances or character. And yet, it felt like another layer of deception in a relationship already built on unusual foundations. What about Eliza? She asked softly. Zach's expression softened as he glanced at the sleeping baby. We could say you were widowed shortly after discovering you were expecting. It would explain why you might have been open to corresponding with a stranger. Naomi nodded slowly. The story was close enough to the truth to be maintained without too much difficulty. Her husband Daniel had indeed died, though not as long ago as the fiction would suggest. And she had been desperate for security when she agreed to marry Zach, just as a young widow with a child might be. "All right," she agreed. "But I don't want to lie more than necessary." "We won't," Zach promised. "The basic facts can remain true. We met in Redemption Creek and married the same day. The correspondence can explain why we moved so quickly." With that settled, they returned to their quiet evening activities, but Naomi found her thoughts wandering. Tomorrow would mark her first real introduction to the community of the Double J as Zachariah Jameson's wife. How would they receive her? Would they accept the story, or would they see through it to the desperate circumstances that had brought her here? More pressingly, what would it feel like to present herself and Zach as a couple united by affection rather than necessity? Thus far, their relationship had been defined by kindness and growing friendship, but not romance. The thought of pretending a deeper connection made her strangely nervous. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Naomi woke earlier than usual, aware of the importance of the day ahead. With Mrs. Cooper's help, she dressed in one of the better gowns they had altered from Zach's mother's wardrobe, a dove-gray cotton, with subtle blue embroidery at the collar and cuffs. "You look lovely," Mrs. Cooper declared, helping her arrange her hair. "That color brings out the amber in your eyes." Zach, who had delayed his morning departure to be present when the supply wagon arrived, seemed to agree. When Naomi descended the stairs with Eliza in her arms, he paused in his conversation with John Garrett, his expression warming visibly. "You look beautiful," he said simply. The compliment, delivered without artifice, brought color to Naomi's cheeks. "Thank you. Is everything ready for the wagon's arrival?" "Just about," Zach replied. "John says they should be here within the hour." The next 60 minutes passed in a flurry of activity as final preparations were made. A table was set up near the barn where mail would be distributed, and Mrs. Cooper arranged refreshments for the ranch hands who would gather to receive news and supplies. When the distant rumble of wagon wheels announced the arrival of the monthly supply train, Naomi stood on the porch with Eliza, Zach at her side. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, a gesture that was becoming familiar, supportive but not possessive, a reminder of his presence without demanding anything in return. The supply wagon was larger than Naomi had expected, drawn by 4 sturdy horses and loaded with barrels, crates, and mail sacks. Behind it rode several men on horseback, clearly having joined the wagon along its route to escort it safely to the ranch. "Mr. Jameson," called the wagon driver, a burly man with an impressive beard. "Got your supplies and a stack of mail from back east. Newspapers full of talk about that centennial exhibition in Philadelphia." "Thank you, Bart," Zach replied, stepping forward to help unload. "Any trouble on the trail?" "Smooth as can be," Bart assured him, then noticed Naomi standing on the porch. His eyes widened, and he removed his hat hastily. "Madam," Zach beckoned Naomi forward. "Bart, I'd like you to meet my wife, Naomi, and her daughter Eliza. Naomi, this is Bartholomew Jenkins. He drives the supply route from Cheyenne once a month." "A wife!" Bart exclaimed, his surprise evident despite his attempt at politeness. "Well now, that's news indeed. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Jameson." "Likewise, Mr. Jenkins," Naomi replied with a smile. Word spread quickly, and soon the yard was filled with ranch hands eager to meet the new Mrs. Jameson. They approached somewhat shyly, hats in hands, offering awkward but sincere congratulations to their employer and respectful greetings to his bride. Naomi did her best to remember names and faces. There was young Noah, whom she had already met. His father, John Garrett, the cook for the bunkhouse, a Mexican man called Miguel, the wranglers Tom and Peter, and several others whose names blurred together in her nervousness. Throughout the introductions, Zach remained close by, his hand occasionally returning to the small of her back or resting briefly on her shoulder, casual touches that nonetheless established their connection for all to see. When questions about their courtship inevitably arose, he smoothly delivered the agreed-upon story about correspondence leading to their meeting in Redemption Creek. Knew right away she was the one, he told the gathered men, his voice warm with an affection that sounded remarkably genuine. Some decisions don't need a lot of deliberation. The men nodded in understanding. In a land where life could be harsh and opportunities for companionship limited, swift courtships were not uncommon. The story of a widowed mother finding love through letters with a lonely rancher was romantic enough to satisfy even the most curious. As the initial excitement of meeting the new Mrs. Jameson subsided, the men returned to the business of unloading supplies and collecting mail. Naomi retreated to the porch with Eliza, who had begun to fuss with all the commotion. "You did wonderfully," Zach said quietly, joining her there. "They're all thoroughly charmed. They seem like good men," Naomi observed, gently bouncing Eliza to soothe her. "They are. Most have been with the ranch for years." When the wagon had been unloaded and the mail distributed, Bart Jenkins approached the house once more. "Mr. Jameson, got something special for you from Denver. Your sister sent it along with strict instructions that I deliver it personally." He handed over a large package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Zach accepted it with raised eyebrows, then broke into a smile as he read the attached note. "It seems my sister heard about our marriage from Dr. Morgan's wife, who wrote to her cousin in Denver," he explained to Naomi. "This is a wedding gift." Together they unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful handmade quilt in shades of blue and cream. Beneath it was a smaller package containing a delicate christening gown for Eliza and a letter addressed to both of them. "She wants to visit as soon as possible," Zach said, scanning the letter. "Rebecca has always been eager for me to marry. She'll be thrilled to meet you." The thoughtful gifts from a woman who had never met her touched Naomi deeply. It was a gesture of acceptance, of welcoming her into the family without question or judgment. "Your sister sounds wonderful," she said softly. "She is," Zach agreed. "Stubborn as the day is long, but with a heart as big as the territory. You'll like each other, I think." As the day progressed and the excitement of the supply wagon's arrival subsided, Naomi found herself reflecting on how quickly her life had changed. In just a week, she had gone from the desperation of the auction block to being introduced as the respected wife of Zachariah Jameson. The transition was dizzying in its swiftness, and yet there was a rightness to it that she couldn't deny. That evening, after the house had quieted and Eliza was asleep, Naomi found Zach on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. She joined him there, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the night's chill. "Thank you for today," she said quietly, "for making it easier than it might have been." Zach turned to her, his expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "You don't need to thank me, Naomi. You handled everything beautifully." "It felt strange," she admitted, telling them our story as if it were a romance rather than what it really was. "What do you think it really was?" Zach asked, his voice gentle. Naomi considered the question. "Rescue," she said finally. "Kindness. Practicality. Those aren't bad foundations for a marriage," Zach observed. "Better than many, perhaps." "Perhaps," Naomi agreed. "But I'm not used to deception, even well-intentioned deception." Zach was quiet for a moment, then said, "The story we told today isn't so far from the truth in its essence. We did meet in Redemption Creek. I did know immediately that I wanted to marry you. The circumstances were different than what we described, but the result is the same." "And what was it you saw that made you so certain?" Naomi asked, genuinely curious about what had prompted his unusual proposal. Zach turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the silvery light. "I saw courage," he said simply. "I saw a woman who, despite being wounded and exhausted, was still fighting to protect her child. I saw someone I wanted to know better, someone I thought could bring something to my life that's been missing for a long time. The sincerity in his voice stirred something deep within Naomi, a warmth that spread through her chest and up to her face. "And have I," she asked softly, "brought something to your life?" "Yes," Zach answered without hesitation. "This house has been just a place to sleep for too long. With you and Eliza here, it's becoming a home again." Impulsively, Naomi reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, and they stood together in comfortable silence, looking out at the star-studded Wyoming night. It wasn't love, not yet, but as Naomi stood beside the man who had become her husband, she felt the first tentative stirrings of something that might, given time and nurturing, grow into something very much like it. Chapter 6 the following Sunday brought Naomi's introduction to the wider community beyond the Double J Ranch. The small church in the valley served as both a place of worship and a social center for the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. Services were held twice monthly when the circuit riding preacher made his rounds, with the congregation gathering afterward to share news and fellowship. "You don't have to go if you're not feeling up to it," Zach told her as they prepared for the day. "No one would think anything of it, given your injury." But Naomi was determined. "I need to meet our neighbors sometime," she said, carefully dressing in the best of the altered gowns, a deep blue dress with a modest lace collar that Mrs. Cooper had assured her was perfect for church. Better to face them all at once than have them dropping by one to satisfy their curiosity. Zach smiled at her practicality. "You're probably right, but if it becomes too much, just let me know and we'll leave early." The journey to the church took nearly an hour by wagon. Zach had arranged a nest of blankets and pillows to make Naomi and Eliza comfortable, but by the time they arrived, Naomi's shoulder was aching from the jolting of the rough road. The church itself was a simple wooden structure with a small steeple, set in a clearing surrounded by pine trees. Several wagons and horses were already gathered outside when they arrived, and Naomi could feel curious eyes on her as Zach helped her down from the wagon. "Ready?" he asked quietly, offering his arm. Naomi nodded, adjusting Eliza in her other arm. "Ready." Their entrance caused a momentary lull in the conversations inside the church. Naomi held her head high, conscious of being the focus of many curious glances. Zach guided her to a pew about halfway down the aisle, nodding greetings to various acquaintances as they passed. An older woman with silver hair approached them immediately. "Zachariah Jameson, you sly fox, getting married without a word to any of us." Zach smiled warmly at the woman. "Mrs. Thornton, may I present my wife, Naomi, and her daughter, Eliza." "Naomi, this is Mrs. Thornton. Her ranch borders ours to the south." "So pleased to meet you, my dear," Mrs. Thornton said, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Naomi and the baby. "What a lovely surprise this is. We'd almost given up hope of our confirmed bachelor settling down." More introductions followed as other members of the congregation came to meet the new Mrs. Jameson. Naomi did her best to remember names and connections, but they blurred together in a whirl of friendly faces and curious questions. Throughout it all, Zach remained steadfastly at her side, his quiet presence a source of strength. The service itself was a welcome respite from the social demands. Reverend Hayes, the same minister who had performed their wedding ceremony, conducted the service with simple dignity. His sermon on the virtue of charity seemed particularly appropriate, though Naomi wondered if he had chosen it specifically with her situation in mind. After the service concluded, the real social event began. Tables were set up outside where the congregation gathered for a communal meal, with each family contributing dishes. Mrs. Cooper had prepared fried chicken and apple pie for the Jamesons to contribute, insisting that Naomi wasn't yet well enough to undertake such cooking. "Mrs. Jameson," called a plump, cheerful woman as they emerged from the church, Do come and sit with us, ladies. We're all dying to hear how you managed to capture our most eligible bachelor." Zach gave Naomi's hand a reassuring squeeze before releasing her to join the group of women gathering under a large oak tree. "I'll be right over there with the men if you need me," he murmured. The women welcomed Naomi warmly, making space for her on a blanket spread over the grass and immediately cooing over Eliza. They were curious but kind, asking about her background and her courtship with Zach with genuine interest rather than malice. Naomi stuck to the agreed-upon story that she was a widow from Missouri whose husband had died shortly after she discovered she was expecting, and who had begun corresponding with Zach through a mutual acquaintance. The women nodded sympathetically at her tale of hardship and sighed romantically at the notion of falling in love through letters. "And then to marry the very day you met in person," exclaimed young Mrs. Peterson, a newlywed herself. "How terribly romantic." "When you know," offered Mrs. Thornton sagely. "My Harold proposed after knowing me just 2 weeks, and we had 43 good years together before he passed." The conversation flowed easily from there, with the women sharing their own courtship stories and offering advice about life in the Wyoming Territory. They were particularly interested in Eliza, passing her from lap to lap with admiring comments about her sweet temperament and pretty features. "She has your eyes," observed Mrs. Miller, a quiet woman with 3 children of her own. "But I see her father in her chin and mouth." Naomi tensed slightly at the comment, uncertain how to respond. The fiction they had created assumed that Eliza's father was Naomi's deceased first husband, but in reality, Daniel had not been her biological father. He had married Naomi knowing she was already with child after a brutal attack, promising to raise the baby as his own, a kindness for which Naomi would be eternally grateful. "Yes," she said finally, deciding that the simplest response was best. "She does have some of his features." From across the churchyard, Zach watched the interaction with a mixture of concern and pride. Naomi seemed to be holding her own among the women, her natural grace and quiet dignity winning them over despite their initial curiosity about the sudden marriage. "She's a fine woman, your bride," commented Harold Thompson, following Zach's gaze. "Pretty as a picture, too." "Yes, she is," Zach agreed, a genuine smile warming his features. "Bit of a whirlwind courtship, I hear," prodded Samuel Jones, the general store owner. "Mail order bride, was it?" "Not exactly," Zach replied, maintaining the fiction they had created. "We corresponded for some time through a mutual acquaintance before meeting in person. When we finally met, well, I knew right away she was the one for me." The men nodded in understanding. Life in the territories was often lonely for single men, and finding a good woman willing to share the hardships of frontier life was considered a stroke of fortune. "The little one seems a sweet child," observed Reverend Hayes, who had joined the group. "A blessing for both of you, I imagine." "Indeed," Zach replied without hesitation. "Eliza is a joy." The easy way he claimed the child as a blessing touched something in Naomi, who happened to glance over at that moment. Their eyes met across the churchyard, and Zach offered her a warm smile that she couldn't help but return. The rest of the afternoon passed pleasantly, with Naomi gradually relaxing into the social gathering. The community was clearly tight-knit, but welcoming, bound together by the shared challenges of frontier life. By the time they prepared to leave, she had received invitations to join the ladies' quilting circle, attend the upcoming harvest festival, and visit several neighboring ranches. "You were wonderful," Zach told her as he helped her back into the wagon for the journey home. "Everyone is quite taken with you." "They're kind people," Naomi replied, settling Eliza, who had fallen asleep after all the excitement. "I wasn't expecting such a warm welcome. People out here understand the importance of community," Zach explained as he took up the reins. "Life is hard enough without adding unnecessary strife." The journey home was quieter than the outward trip, both of them tired from the social demands of the day. Naomi found herself dozing against Zach's shoulder, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon and the warmth of his solid presence beside her. She awoke with a start when the wagon stopped in front of the ranch house. "I'm sorry," she murmured, embarrassed to have fallen asleep on him. "Don't be," Zach replied, his voice gentle. "You're still recovering. It was a long day." That evening, after Eliza was settled for the night, Naomi joined Zach on the porch as had become their custom. The autumn air was crisp, promising frost by morning, and Zach had thoughtfully brought a quilt to wrap around her shoulders. "Thank you for today," Naomi said, drawing the quilt closer, "for making it easier than it might have been." "You did all the hard work," Zach replied with a smile, charming everyone, remembering all those names, answering all those questions. "It was nice," Naomi admitted, "to be treated as just another neighbor, another wife, not as—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Not as what?" Zach prompted gently. Naomi sighed. "Not as someone to be pitied, or someone with a questionable past. Just as Mrs. Jameson, who moved here to be with her husband." Zach was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "You know, the story we've been telling isn't so far from the truth in many ways. You did come here to start a new life. We did decide to marry after meeting in Redemption Creek. But we didn't fall in love through letters," Naomi pointed out. "You didn't know anything about me when you made your offer." "That's true," Zach acknowledged. "But I knew the important things. I knew you were brave and devoted to your daughter. I knew you had the kind of strength it takes to survive out here." He paused, then added more softly, "And I find that each day, I'm learning more things to admire about you." The warmth in his voice brought a flush to Naomi's cheeks that had nothing to do with the crisp evening air. She was grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. "I'm learning about you too," she said after a moment. "How you treat your men fairly, how you remember the little things Mrs. Cooper mentions in passing, how gentle you are with Eliza. They're all good things to know about the man I've married." Zach turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Naomi, I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. This marriage may have started as a practical arrangement, but I hope that in time, it might become something more. But there's no rush and no pressure." His consideration touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "for understanding, for being patient." "We have time," Zach replied simply. "All the time we need." As they sat together in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky, Naomi reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. 2 weeks ago, she had been at the lowest point of her life, facing a future of degradation and fear. Now she was the respected wife of a good man, accepted by the community, with a safe home for herself and Eliza. It wasn't the life she had once dreamed of, back in her innocent girlhood in Missouri. But as she glanced at the strong profile of the man beside her, Naomi found herself wondering if perhaps it might become something even better than those long-ago dreams. Chapter 7 October brought a new rhythm to life at the Double J Ranch. The days grew shorter and the nights colder as autumn deepened toward winter. The ranch hands were busy with fall roundup, gathering cattle from the summer pastures and preparing for the leaner months ahead. Inside the house, Naomi and Mrs. Cooper worked to preserve the last of the garden's bounty, filling the root cellar with jars of vegetables, fruits, and preserves. Naomi's shoulder healed steadily under Dr. Morgan's care. By mid-October, she was able to use her arm almost normally, though she still avoided heavy lifting. The increased mobility allowed her to take on more household responsibilities, gradually assuming the role of mistress of the house with growing confidence. "You've got a natural talent for this," Mrs. Cooper observed one afternoon as they worked together in the kitchen. Some women take years to find their footing running a ranch house. I had good training, Naomi replied, carefully stirring a pot of apple butter. My mother managed our farm in Missouri while my father was away during the war. She taught me that a well-run household is the foundation of everything else. Your mother taught you well, Mrs. Cooper agreed. Mr. Jameson notices too, you know. I've never seen him so content to come home at the end of the day. The observation brought a flush of pleasure to Naomi's cheeks. It was true that Zach seemed to linger more in the house these days, rather than returning to work after the evening meal as he had often done before. Sometimes he would read aloud from the newspaper while she sewed, or they would play checkers at the kitchen table after Eliza was asleep. Simple, domestic evenings that were gradually building a comfortable intimacy between them. Their relationship remained chaste, with Zach continuing to sleep in the smaller bedroom down the hall. But the awkwardness of those first days had given way to a warm friendship and growing affection. Naomi found herself watching for his return each evening, enjoying the way his face lit up when he greeted Eliza, appreciating the quiet consideration he showed in 100 small ways. One crisp October morning, Naomi was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw Zach riding toward the house with another man beside him. As they drew closer, she recognized Dr. Morgan, and her heart skipped with concern. Was something wrong? She hurried to meet them as they dismounted. Is everything all right? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. Everything's fine, Zach assured her quickly. Dr. Morgan was checking on the Thompsons' new baby and offered to stop by to see how you're healing. I'm doing well, Naomi said, relaxing. Much stronger now. Let me be the judge of that, the doctor replied with a smile. Professional pride, you understand. Inside the house, Dr. Morgan examined Naomi's shoulder thoroughly, nodding with satisfaction at the well-healed wound. Excellent recovery, he pronounced. You can resume normal activities now, though I'd still be cautious with any strenuous exertion for another few weeks. After the examination, they shared coffee in the main room. Eliza, who had recently begun to sit up on her own, was propped on a blanket nearby, happily playing with a wooden rattle Zach had carved for her. She's thriving, Dr. Morgan observed, watching the baby with approval. Good color, alert, hitting all her milestones. You're doing a fine job with her, Mrs. Jameson. Thank you, Naomi replied, her heart warming at the praise. The doctor turned his attention to Zach. And how are you finding married life, Jameson? Everything you hoped for? If the directness of the question surprised Zach, he didn't show it. Better, he replied simply, his gaze shifting to Naomi with a warmth that made her breath catch. Far better. After Dr. Morgan departed, Zach lingered in the house rather than returning immediately to his work. He seemed to have something on his mind, pacing slightly before finally turning to Naomi. Since you're fully recovered now, I thought we might ride out tomorrow to see more of the ranch, he suggested. If you'd like to, that is. You haven't had a chance to explore much beyond the immediate area around the house. I'd love that, Naomi replied, genuinely pleased by the idea. But what about Eliza? Mrs. Cooper can watch her for a few hours, Zach said. She's already offered. I think she's eager for some time alone with her little angel, as she calls her. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for riding. Zach had arranged for a gentle mare for Naomi, a pretty sorrel named Clover who was patient enough for a somewhat inexperienced rider but spirited enough to be interesting. She's beautiful, Naomi said, stroking the mare's velvet nose. I thought you'd like her, Zach replied, helping her mount. She belongs to you now. Every ranch wife needs her own horse. The simple gift touched Naomi deeply. It was practical, yes, but also personal, a recognition of her permanent place at the Double J. They rode out first to the nearest pastures, where the cattle were gathered for the fall roundup. Naomi watched with interest as the ranch hands worked, skillfully separating animals, checking for illness or injury, and branding the late-season calves. "It's an impressive operation," she observed as they rode on. "Larger than I realized." "My father started with just 100 head," Zach explained. "Now we run nearly 2,000. It's good land, and we've been fortunate with weather and markets." He showed her the boundaries of the property: the mountain range to the west, the creek to the north, the rolling hills to the east where their land met the Thompson Ranch. Everywhere they rode, Naomi noted the careful management of the land, the well-maintained fences, the strategically placed windmills for water. "You love it here," she said. Not a question but an observation. Zach nodded, his gaze sweeping over the landscape. "I can't imagine being anywhere else. My father used to say that some men are born with the land in their blood. I think I'm one of them." They stopped for lunch at a high meadow overlooking much of the valley. Zach spread a blanket on the grass, and they shared the meal Mrs. Cooper had packed for them: cold chicken, biscuits, cheese, and apple tarts. "It's so peaceful here," Naomi said, leaning back on her hands to look out over the vista before them. "I can see why you never left." "I did leave briefly," Zach admitted, surprising her. "Went to college in Denver for 2 years after my mother died. Studied business and agriculture. My father thought it was important. But you came back." "I was always going to come back," Zach said simply. "This is where I belong." They were quiet for a moment, enjoying the tranquility of the high meadow and the warmth of the autumn sun. Naomi found herself studying Zach's profile: the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkle at the corners of his eyes, the way the breeze ruffled his dark hair. "What about you?" he asked, turning to catch her watching him. "Do you miss Missouri?" Naomi considered the question. "I miss certain things: the lushness of the forests, the fireflies in summer, the familiarity of places I'd known all my life. But there were painful memories too, especially after the war." "Your husband Daniel, was he from Missouri as well?" "Yes," Naomi replied, her expression softening at the memory. "We grew up in the same town. He went away to fight when I was 16 and came back changed, like so many did. But he was a good man. Kind." Zach nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And after he died, you decided to come west?" This was where their agreed-upon fiction diverged from reality, and Naomi hesitated. The truth was that Daniel had been killed just weeks ago, not before Eliza's birth as their story claimed. But she was reluctant to lie directly to Zach, who had been nothing but honest with her. "The West seemed to offer a fresh start," she said carefully, neither confirming nor denying the timeline they had presented to others. "A place where the past might not matter so much." Zach seemed to sense her discomfort with the subject and didn't press further. Instead, he packed up the remains of their lunch and suggested they continue their exploration of the ranch. They rode for another hour, cresting a hill that offered views all the way to the distant mountains, their peaks already dusted with early snow. As they headed back toward the ranch house, Zach pointed out a small cabin nestled in a grove of aspens near the creek. "My father built that when he first claimed this land," he explained. "He lived there alone for 2 years before returning east to marry my mother and bring her back. We use it as a line shack now, a place for the hands to stay when they're working the far pastures. It's charming," Naomi observed, admiring the rustic structure with its stone chimney and small porch. "Would you like to see inside?" Zach offered. The interior of the cabin was simple but comfortable: a main room with a fireplace, a small bedroom behind a curtain, and basic furnishings that spoke of occasional use. Zach built a small fire to ward off the afternoon chill, while Naomi explored the space. "Your father must have been very determined," she said, imagining a young man carving out a life in this wilderness alone. He was, Zach agreed, pride evident in his voice. Left Pennsylvania with nothing but a wagon, some tools, and a dream. Met my mother on a trip back east to sell his first cattle. She was a Boston girl, educated and refined, but she fell in love with his stories of Wyoming and agreed to come back with him. Was she happy here? Naomi asked, genuinely curious about the woman who had left civilization for this remote life. Zach smiled, his eyes distant with memory. Enormously happy. She used to say that she found herself in this valley, that the space and freedom allowed her to become who she was truly meant to be. He glanced at Naomi. I think she would have liked you very much. I wish I could have known her, Naomi replied softly. They sat together by the fire for a time, the conversation flowing easily between them. Zach shared stories of growing up on the ranch, learning to ride almost before he could walk, getting lost in the hills as a boy and being found by his father's best ranch hand, watching the railroad arrive in the territory and change everything. In return, Naomi told him about her childhood in Missouri, swimming in the creek during hot summers, the excitement of county fairs, the community barn raisings that brought everyone together. She carefully avoided mentioning the war years or the more recent hardships that had led her to Redemption Creek, and Zach seemed to understand her reticence, never pushing for details she wasn't ready to share. As the afternoon light began to fade, they reluctantly prepared to head back to the main house. Zach helped Naomi mount Clover, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. The casual touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, and when their eyes met, she saw something in his gaze that made her heart beat faster. The ride back was quiet, both of them absorbed in their thoughts as the setting sun painted the landscape in gold and amber. By the time they reached the ranch, the first stars were appearing in the deepening blue of the eastern sky. Mrs. Cooper met them at the door, Eliza in her arms. There you are. I was beginning to wonder if you'd decided to stay out all night. Sorry we're late, Zach apologized, taking Eliza from her. We got caught up exploring. Well, dinner's keeping warm in the oven, and this little angel has been fed and changed. She's been as good as gold all day, haven't you, sweet girl? Mrs. Cooper tickled Eliza under the chin, eliciting a delighted gurgle. After Mrs. Cooper departed for her own home, Naomi and Zach shared a simple dinner at the kitchen table, with Eliza contentedly playing in her cradle nearby. The day's adventure had created a new ease between them, the shared experiences and conversations building bridges across the unusual circumstances of their marriage. Thank you for today, Naomi said as they finished their meal. For showing me the ranch, for telling me about your family. Thank you for wanting to see it, to hear about them, Zach replied. It means a lot to share it with someone who appreciates it. That night, as Naomi prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about Zach in a way she hadn't before. The attraction she felt toward him was no longer simply gratitude or admiration, but something more visceral, more personal. She had glimpsed today not just the kind man who had rescued her, but the passionate rancher, the devoted son, the person who might one day be a true husband to her in every sense. As she drifted toward sleep, Eliza peaceful beside her, Naomi wondered if Zach was lying awake down the hall, thinking of her as she was thinking of him. The possibility brought a smile to her lips as she surrendered to dreams. Chapter 8. November arrived with the first significant snowfall of the season. Naomi woke one morning to find the world transformed, the familiar landscape of the ranch now blanketed in pristine white, the distant mountains sharp and clear against the pale blue sky. The snow brought changes to the rhythm of ranch life. The cattle were moved to sheltered pastures closer to the barn, and the ranch hands spent more time repairing equipment and tending to indoor tasks. Zach was often out before dawn and didn't return until after dark, working to ensure that everything and everyone was prepared for the harsher weather to come. Inside the house, Naomi found herself settling more deeply into her role as mistress of the Double J. Mrs. Cooper still came several days a week, but increasingly Naomi took the lead in managing the household. She had learned the rhythms of the place, when to have hot coffee waiting for the men coming in from early chores, how to plan meals that would sustain them through long, cold days of work, which rooms needed extra attention to stay warm as the temperature dropped. Eliza continued to thrive, growing more alert and interactive each day. She had begun to babble constantly, her little voice filling the house with joyful sounds. At 7 months, she was now sitting up confidently and trying to crawl, though she mostly managed to scoot backward, much to her frustration. Zach was endlessly patient with her attempts, often getting down on the floor to encourage her efforts. The bond between them had grown strong over the past months, with Eliza clearly adoring the man who had so readily claimed the role of father in her life. "She'll be walking before we know it," he observed one evening as Eliza rocked determinedly on her hands and knees, trying to figure out the mechanics of forward movement. "And then running," Naomi agreed with a smile. "I'm not sure the house is ready." "We'll make it ready," Zach replied, reaching out to steady Eliza as she toppled sideways. "Maybe we should think about turning that storage room upstairs into a proper nursery for her, now that she's getting more mobile." The casual way he spoke of future plans for their family touched Naomi deeply. It reinforced what she already knew, that Zach's commitment to her and Eliza was genuine and long-term, not just a temporary arrangement of convenience. Their relationship had evolved as well over the autumn weeks. The initial awkwardness had given way to comfortable companionship, and increasingly to moments of genuine connection that hinted at deeper feelings. They still maintained separate bedrooms, but their evenings were spent together reading, talking, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence by the fire. Physical contact between them had become more natural as well. Zach no longer hesitated to touch her arm to get her attention, to rest his hand at the small of her back when they walked together, or to brush a stray strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. Each small touch seemed to build a bridge between them, gradually closing the distance that their unusual beginning had created. One snowy afternoon in mid-November, Naomi was in the kitchen preparing a stew for dinner when she heard the front door open and Zach's heavy footsteps in the entryway. It was earlier than he usually returned, and she went to greet him with surprise. "You're home early," she said, then stopped when she saw his face. He looked exhausted, his features drawn with what appeared to be pain. "What's wrong?" "Threw my back out helping the men move hay bales," he admitted, easing himself carefully into a chair. "Happens sometimes in the cold. Usually rights itself in a day or two." Naomi moved to his side immediately. "Let me help you upstairs. You should lie down properly, not sit in this hard chair." "I'm not sure I can manage the stairs right now," Zach confessed, wincing as he shifted position. "Then the sofa," Naomi decided, already moving to arrange pillows and blankets. "Can you make it that far?" With her support, Zach managed to cross to the sofa and ease himself down with a barely suppressed groan. Naomi helped him remove his boots and outer layers, then covered him with a warm quilt. "I'll make you some willow bark tea for the pain," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "Dr. Morgan showed me how to prepare it when my shoulder was healing." "Thank you," Zach replied, his voice tight with discomfort. "I'm sorry to be such poor company." "Don't be ridiculous," Naomi chided gently. "You've taken care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." Throughout the afternoon and evening, Naomi tended to Zach with quiet efficiency. She brought him tea and soup, placed hot compresses on his lower back, and made sure he was as comfortable as possible. When Eliza became fussy, demanding attention, Naomi managed both her needs and Zach's without complaint. "You're good at this," Zach observed as she adjusted a pillow behind his back. "Taking care of people." "I've had practice," Naomi replied, thinking of the years she had cared for her mother after her father's death and later for Daniel during his struggles after the war. But I enjoy it. Zach watched her with a blend of admiration and affection, the warmth spreading between them undeniable even in silence. As the evening wore on and the fire crackled softly in the hearth, they found themselves slipping into a comfortable intimacy, the day's challenges drawing them closer together as a family.